This video follows on from intervals part 1. You might want to watch it before looking at this one. A link is given in the description below. Let's start by listening to these thirds. Although they sound very similar, they are not exactly the same. Here are the last two played more slowly. If you listen really carefully, you might hear that apart from the pitch, they sound slightly different. Now let's look at fifths. Medieval musicians loved these intervals. They are the cleanest and purest intervals we have, apart from the octave. Hence I've added some angel faces to represent this. But there is a problem. Let's listen. You can hear that the last one is distinctly different. It doesn't get an angel face. Listen again. Medieval musicians hated this interval. They called it diabolus in musica, the devil in music. So why does this fifth sound so different from the others? Well, remember how we ignored the black notes, sharps and flats, in the previous video? Now we have to take them into account. But first, we'll have to explain what a semitone is. Have a look at this keyboard. You can see that it consists of white notes and black notes. The distance between any two adjacent notes on a keyboard is a semitone, regardless of the color of the note. Listen to these semitones going up. Now let's look at these fifths. We'll count up the semitones of the one beginning on G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Since there are 7 semitones, we can represent this interval as two numbers. 5, since it's a fifth, and 7 since there are 7 semitones. Now let's try the one beginning on A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This also has 7 semitones, so we can represent this in the same way as the previous one. Now for the one beginning on B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This has 6 semitones, so we represent it as 5, 6. The difference in the number of semitones is the reason this fifth sounds so different. So now we have a way to clearly define an interval. This one is a third. It has 3 letter names and 4 semitones, so we can define it by a 3 and a 4. This next one is also a third. It has 3 letter names and 3 semitones, so we can define it by a 3 and a 3. Look at this one. It's a fourth, with 4 letter names and 5 semitones, so we can define it by a 4 and a 5. This one is also a fourth. It has 4 letter names and 6 semitones, so we can define it by a 4 and a 6. This is fairly simple, and if musicians were as logical as mathematicians, they would be quite happy with it. Unfortunately, musicians are not quite so logical and have to complicate things quite a lot. They use words to distinguish different types of interval. Here are a series of intervals in the key of C major, with the key note at the bottom. The left-hand number in each group is the interval number and the right-hand number the number of semitones. Since they are derived from the major scale, we can call them major intervals. Major unison, major second, major third, and so on. Now let's look at a slightly altered minor scale. Because these intervals are mostly derived from the natural minor scale, we can call them minor intervals. Minor 6, minor 7, and so on. The exception is the second. D flat is not in the key of C minor, but we still call it a minor second. Sorry folks, but we musicians are not totally logical. If you look at the unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves, you can see that they are exactly the same. So how do we know that a fifth is a major fifth, or minor fifth? The answer is that we don't. Because these intervals are the same in major and minor keys, we call them perfect intervals. So unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves are perfect. Seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can be major or minor. But what if we want to increase or decrease these by a semitone? How do we define these intervals? We use two words. Augmented, which means bigger, and diminished, which means smaller. If an interval is a semitone bigger than a major or perfect interval, it's called augmented, that is, made bigger. If an interval is a semitone smaller than a minor or perfect interval, it's called diminished, that is, made smaller. You can see the number of semitones increasing as you move from the bottom to the top of each column. You might also notice that intervals with different initial numbers can have the same number of semitones. For instance, a major third and a diminished fourth both have 4. Does this mean that they sound the same? In real music, they don't, because the melodic and harmonic context is completely different in each case. Listen to this 4-semitone interval, defined as a major third. Here it is with the in-between notes of the key in which it occurs. And here is an example of some music which is characterized by it. Now listen to it defined as a diminished fourth. Here it is with the in-between notes of the key in which it occurs. Listen to the interval again after hearing the previous example. It sounds different, although physically it is exactly the same. And here is an example of some music which is characterized by it. Let's listen to both of these examples again. Their musical context makes them sound quite different, so writing it as a major third or a diminished fourth is really important in each case. There has to be a clear correspondence between how it is written and how it is perceived. In the first video, we said that clefs didn't matter since a fifth, for example, was always a fifth in any clef. This is still true, but the type of interval, perfect, major, etc., does depend on the clef. These notes are G and D in the treble clef, and this forms a perfect fifth. They also form a perfect fifth in the alto clef, with A to E. In the bass clef, however, B to F forms a diminished fifth. To summarize: 1. Intervals can be accurately defined by two numbers. The first by the number of letter names, white notes on the keyboard, or lines and spaces on the stave, and the second by the number of semitones. 2. Musicians tend not to use this method, but for traditional reasons, define intervals using names. These are major, minor, perfect, diminished, and augmented. A link to a table outlining these is given below. 3. Intervals containing the same number of semitones need to be spelled correctly. For example, an interval containing 4 semitones, which sounds like a major third in its musical context, needs to be written that way and not as a diminished fourth. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button.